Welcome to today's artifact. I'm Professor Bob, and as you can see, I have my Napoleon hoodie on. So I don't have my fancy sports jacket or one of my sports jackets. And the reason is this is not just going to be about an individual item. On May the 5th, 1821, Napoleon died on St Helena. So on May the 5th, 2021, the date of the show, it is the 200th anniversary of his death on St. Helena. So there's various celebrations in different parts of the world, particularly in France. The people who were conquered, particularly in Britain, will have a different view of that. That's not what we're concerned about. I want to show you my personal collection of objects associated with Napoleon's exile on St. Helena, as well as his reburial when they bring him back in 1840. So we still have another Bi-Centennial event awaiting us. Now, one of the things I need to talk about, and it's a term called provenance. I have not used it in showing you artifacts, but provenance is the accuracy where your information comes from that makes that object authentic. Is it authentic? And there's a lot of ways of doing that. Obviously, archaeologically excavating it from the site that's been found, having experts sign off on it, have collectors sign off on it. Various ways of keeping track of it. But it's always important when you're buying a historical item, particularly if you're going to be spending a lot of money on it. So let me first of all start off with something that is not from the period, 1815, 1821, or 1840. And I'm going to start off with this very nice coffee set, cup and saucer. This is made by Wedgwood. The original pattern, Ivy, started in 1800. It is now known as Napoleon Ivy because in 1815, this is what was on the island for Napoleon and his companions to use for the dinnerware. I doubt really whether they used this much because surely they brought with them some French service as well. But this was what was used. The Wedgwood Company continued manufacturing it for a time. Then it was discontinued. In 1965 through 1976, they reissued it. And so on the bottom of the reissues, it doesn't say reissue. It says Napoleon Ivy, as used by Napoleon at St. Helena, 1815. Wedgwood, made in England, and then the pattern number. And you'll always find that on the back. You can still buy this. It's not that expensive, but it is possible. So that's one of the things you have to be careful of. You go to an antique store, you see that underneath it. Well, I doubt whether it would have said Napoleon 1815 on it originally, but that's a good indication that it's a reproduction. Not unusual. So it's still nice. I have a cup of coffee on usually his birthday using that. Another object, now you can see it in front of me. I'm not going to really show it to you. It's one of those replicas that you buy in Paris of the death mask. And the originals are obviously much larger than anything else. I just put it there just for the heck of it. Doesn't get shown a lot. So it's just sitting there taking its place. The next thing is not a replica, but it's not from the time of Napoleon. It is what is known as the St. Helena medal. Now, the St. Helena medal was created in August the 12th, 1857, by the French government to give it to people who were veterans of the Napoleonic Wars who were still alive. The Legion of Honor estimated that there were 450,000 veterans still alive in 1857. So this is the medal that they were given. Now this is the original medal in bronze, Napoleon on one side, and then a statement on the back. But before I get to the statement, this is a replica of the ribbon that would have been with it. Ribbons in military medals, particularly if you wear them out many times on your uniform as an honor, they deteriorate pretty rapidly. So it's not uncommon to find these without the ribbon on top of it. But I want to warn you about this, because frequently this is sold as the St. Helena medal, as a medal for the people who were on the island with him. And that's because on the back it says, quote, and this is the English translation, "To the companions in glory, his last thought, St. Helena, May the 5th, 1821. Actually, 5th of May, 1821. If it said May the 5th, it would have been done by somebody other than the French, the Europeans. And what will happen is, it's in French, and people will sell it, because you can see Campagne and St. Helena and the date, and they'll say this was a medal that was given to the people who were with him on the island in exile. And that's not true. They were obviously given one, but they didn't get a special one. So that's what's known as the St. Helena medal. It's also known as the chocolate drop. This one has been cleaned. Normally they are dark chocolate brown, and you really have to be aware of what they are. But I still see them every once in a while at military shows. Now we come to a couple of other things. We get to some real stuff. Some kind of material that you'll go, where in the world did that come from, and how do you know that's real? Well, we'll get to that provenance in a second. There are two books here in front of me by a man named Las Casas. As you can see, the Memorial de St Helena. 2 volumes. Mr. Las Casas was one of the men who was on the island with Napoleon, and Napoleon dictated his memoirs to him. And then he published these books. He was still alive at the time of Napoleon's reburial. He went to the island with some of the surviving members, and quite frankly, quite a few of them were still alive, and came back on the La Belle Poule, and was there for the interment of Napoleon in the Invalides. Well, what I have is a letter. A written letter signed by Las Casas. This is probably written on the ship on the way home, because it's dated October 1840. And Napoleon was reburied in December of 1840. Now, I collect autographs, so there are ways of finding examples of what the real name looks like. But if you're purchasing an item, sometimes there are companies that are better known than others. This was purchased from a company in the United States known as Walter R. Benjamin. And it is one of the 2 or 3 finest autograph houses in the United States. I purchased my Napoleon signature, which you'll see one of these days, from them in the 70s. They really don't have a catalog anymore. They do all auctions, as do a lot of other places. And this happened to be in just some regular materials that I had purchased. I probably paid $100 or $200 for a set number of 10 odds and ends. Sometimes it was very common in the 1800s for people to just snip the names off of letters. And this one had the whole letter in with the group. So I had found that in my pile of stuff that I have. So I have one of the letters and the signatures of the man who wrote one of the best books from eyewitness accounts. Then we come to, what else do we have in front of me? Well, yeah, the biggest thing I think you can see is this. The plastic piece over here holds a flattened section of a St. Helena fern. It's only found on the island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. The other thing is a little bit more important. Originally, when Napoleon was buried on St. Helena, and the funeral and the burial will take place next week for the Bi-Centennial, they put a limestone or a stone from the quarries there in St. Helena over the top of it. Of course, the British also then pinioned it with iron pinions so that you couldn't just take it off. There's a big chunk broken off the front of it. That was done when they came in to disinter him and take him back to France. Story is that part of that was sent to the United States for a monument, for a piece of it to be thrown into the foundation of any monument the American government made for George Washington. Because Napoleon loved George Washington. Actually, his attack plan for Toulon, where he moved the artillery to the heights to move the British Navy out of the harbor, came from listening to reading the accounts of Washington's removal of the British Navy from Boston Harbor. And when George Washington died, a national day of mourning was declared. So he was very fond of him. Now, there is an issue with this being part of that piece. You certainly couldn't have taken one big chunk off, so there would have been other pieces. And we know that souvenir collectors at the time were crazy. The willow tree that was nearby was literally pulled up in 1840 and hauled back to France, or parts of it. And other people would tear limbs off of it, leaves off of it. And so when they removed the body, they had to break the stone up in a couple of pieces. Now, the original is in the courtyard outside in the Invalides today. And I doubt whether you can see it very well, because by now the growth has gone up all the way around it. You cannot, as far as I know, go out and see it specifically. So this is supposed to be a piece of the stone that covered Napoleon's grave. There is a second possibility. And the second possibility is when the body was removed, the grave was filled back in, and later generations put another slab over it. And then that has been periodically been repaired. According to my provenance, this is from the original, purchased from someone who was on the island, and it was handed down through the generations by the French consul later on. Okay? So it's one of those things that you can believe it is the original one, or it could be one of the others. But it was in that position. You say, well, what about who is that person? Well, let's go to the next thing. When I purchased that, it came with 2 very small vials, sealed with wax. It's very typical from the 1800s, particularly in the 1830s and 40s. This white powder is supposed to be cement from the grave, and they used a lot of it. It's a really deep grave. They were afraid, I guess he was afraid he was going to resurrect. They didn't want somebody stealing his body. And then it also comes with a bigger vial, sealed with dirt, and that's supposed to be dirt from the grave. And these were very common amongst the people who lived on the island. And of course, when they excavated the grave, a lot of the soldiers took this as well. So you'll actually find several of these. The trick is looking at how the wax is done, the glass from the period, and then of course, do you have somebody who says that it is? Well, when I purchased those, it came with the certificate of authenticity. The certificate is signed by Gilbert Martineau. Gilbert Martineau was the consul general for France in all of its museums and period and buildings on the island of St Helena. And that was from the period 1956 until 1987. And he collected all of these materials in his private collection. Some of them, I believe, went to the University of Florida, Tallahassee, which used to have a spectacular Napoleon collection. And I believe some of that has been liquidated. And some of it has appeared before. Actually, the stone that I have over here, I've seen it at auction before. And needless to say, I was not able to afford it the first time. This last time, somebody really didn't know its value. But that's okay. That's good. And so it's a letter signed by Martineau, sealed, and dated. So that's about as good a provenance as you're going to get. There'll still be skeptics, but that's okay. Skepticism is good. And then the last thing that I'm going to show you is really interesting. Monsieur Martineau actually lived in Longwood, and it was redone on multiple occasions. And what is here? Fortunately, it's wood, so I don't have to be quite so careful with it. It's just a sliver of wood. The letter of authenticity says this is a piece of wood from the dining room at Longwood, signed by Martin Gilbert, and it is dated. Actually, it's dated the 18th of June, 1963. Probably did some renovation. It's a nice cut piece. So there's probably from any number of places in that when you do restoration. So, a very, very nice special object for me. Napoleonic historian. I worked on my master's degree, and my thesis was on the political ramifications of the return of Napoleon's ashes, body, to France in 1840. So I never dreamed that I would ever be able to get anything other than perhaps reissues. So to have these, particularly important to me. Now in the past, I've shown you things that I've used in class. I have not had the piece from Longwood's dining room for very long. So I have not taught a course and had that available. I've only had that for the last 6 or 7 months. The piece of the gravestone and the dirt, I have taken that to class. Again, those are very small vials. At best, you bring them in, and I'll talk about it just as I talked about it to you, because kids are going to be very skeptical. Where'd you get that? But by the time we get to Napoleon, they've seen a lot of historical items that I brought into class. And after you've seen my Napoleon signatures and autographs and materials, there's really not much of their doubting that I believe it's authentic. And so this is more of a collector's corner this time, but they are indeed interesting artifacts. And actually, I've never shared them all at one time with anyone. So this video is the first time that has happened. And you'll probably see some other stuff as we go along. I've worked with Gilbert Martineau by correspondence when I was doing my master's thesis, finding information on the second burial back in France. And I was able to get some microfilm from the Bibliothèque Nationale with the help of my college professor who knew the director. So I hope you enjoyed that. It's a little something I put together for the Bi-Centennial of Napoleon's death. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you learned something.